All right, so hi, I'm Ben Chung. Make sure your seats are in the upright position, your tray table's up, and make sure your phones are in vibrate mode or in airplane mode. And fasten your seatbelt. I'm going to take you on a ride here to the Bell Labs Showcase Museum. This is the actual Bell Labs archives, of which this is part of, has 10,000 artifacts. And there's about 100, 150 things here. So you're seeing just about 1% of what's actually in the total archives, but it's a lot of cool stuff. So in 1896, Western Electric and Western Avenue in Manhattan opens up property on West Street, and that starts essentially Bell Labs. If you look on the Manhattan, if you look at the Manhattan map, you'll see Murray Hill actually. And during World War II, in 1942, this property here at Murray Hill opens up. And there's a really good book called The Idea Factory by Joe Gertner, which talks about how they found this site and how they built it. So behind the walls, there's actually like scientific pipes and access to gases and stuff that they did for basic scientific research. Last year, we celebrated our 100th year anniversary. So I'm the Bell Labs photographer, and there were a lot of really amazing, interesting projects going on. And there were 4 Nobel laureates here, 2 Turing Award winnees. So I'll probably never be, in my life again, be in a room with that many notable people. The museum or the showcase is kind of divided into these 6 areas. I'm going to walk you through all these areas, or hit some highlights on all these areas. So this is about basic communications connecting the world. This is about sort of art, AV, TV, early film, pure science here, and communications, and then, and then advanced sustainability and its awards, so let's begin.
When did it become Nokia?
When did it become what?
Nokia.
Oh, Nokia. So this started in. I first joined Lucent in the 90s, and that had just split off from AT&T. So Western Electric, AT&T has Bell Labs, and then Bell Labs comes with Lucent. So in 1996, I joined in November 1996, and that's when Bell Labs comes with Lucent, and eventually we merged with Alcatel-Lucent in about 2007 or so, and then 2017 Nokia acquires Alcatel-Lucent, and it also acquires Bell Labs at the same time. Today there's located, even though that sign says it's 11 locations, it's actually 8 locations around the world. So this is like the central location for Bell Labs, but it's actually all around the world. So this was a replica. Everything you see here in the showcase is the original thing, except for this. This is a replica of the first working telephone. This was actually moved around and showcased around the country so often that it kind of degraded over time, and so they built a replica. You're welcome to take pictures of anything too you want. So in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell, he talks to his assistant and shows that this works. The audio sound from a voice vibrates a membrane, which stimulates an electrical signal, and is able to carry voice, and the reverse happens. And that's basically the concept of a phone. And it's funny because I teach sign language, and I have a friend whose mom, the modern sign language sign for phone is like this, right? But her sign for sign language is, so it's really interesting to see how that's evolved. Okay, we're gonna step over here. This is communications here. And so one of the first things I'm going to talk about is the submarine cable. So the first transatlantic undersea cable was laid across the Atlantic in 1956. You can see between the US and the UK through Canada. You can see this cable here. It holds 12 simultaneous calls. And in the archives, there's actually a big, huge chunk of this cable. It's really interesting to see. You can see the cladding there, those little wires. The 12. This thing holds 12 calls at once.
And what's the other thing in there?
That's a vacuum tube, I believe. So
Yes.
So
What
the
does it do?
repeater and the system.
Repeater.
Yeah.
Okay.
So. Okay. So here, 8 generations later, you can see this, which is an undersea fiber optic cable. So those 2 thin, tiny lines holds 40,000 simultaneous conversations.
Versus 12.
Yeah, versus 12, right? Built. It was built. It goes 3,148 miles. It's laid in 1956. It's a joint venture between AT&T and France Telecom and British Telecom, and it cost $335 million. So one of the things I'm going to spend a little bit of time on is this. Among all the panels here, and John, you might want to come around. Among all of the things that we show here, this might be these 2 panels might be one of the most important panels. And the reason because it's kind of like at the heart of the current Nokia's business and the wireless business. And maybe you want to swing around a little bit. And this is where I spent most of my career too, starting in 2G, TDMA, and CDMA. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So in the 1940s, actually, 1946, MTS, mobile telephone system, telecommunication systems, even before the first 1G came out, they developed it. But the very first phones were car phones. And most people have heard of car phones. They were 80 pounds. They took up a good chunk of a trunk. And
had one.
Early in IMT, a city could have 3, 4 calls at once. So very very limited capacity. So fast forward some decades, 1971. In 1971, Amos Joule comes up with the idea of the cellular concept, and here a particular frequency can be reused. Like the frequency here is red and the pink and the blue. These are all frequencies that are reused again and again, and that is why we call them cell phones today. So the reach of each of these little cells is anywhere from 1 to 20 miles. So the sort of size of the diameter of one of these cells is 1 to 20 miles, depending on if it's a rural area or not. And in the first generation was called analog mobile phone system, so 1G. And it's just really trying to develop the fundamental basics of communications and cellular communications. So the phones were those bricks, those big big phones. And eventually today they continue to shrink. But at 1G, the round trip time is 100 to 200 milliseconds. And so you can't hear, your ear can differentiate, you can sense 100 to 200 millisecond difference. By the time we get to 3G and 4G, it's around 10 to 20 millisecond difference. And your, so if I take a pen here, and I wiggle it really fast, that's faster than your eye can resolve, right? So that's fast. That's about 10 to 20 milliseconds round trip time. And so you see by the time of 3G and 4G, it's starting to get to a point where we can watch videos, right? So 3G and 4G is about machine-to-human communications, downloading videos, streaming, watching news. 5G is about machine-to-machine communications. So its round-trip time is 1 millisecond. Can you guess which sense works at the 1 millisecond time scale? Any guesses? So it's not hearing because that's 1G. It's not sight. It's 3G. Smell? Smell and taste are fast. So your sense of touch is at 1 millisecond. It's one of your fastest senses. So if you touch your hot stove, you'll pull back very, very quickly. So 5G is something will have what's called haptic touch communications. You'll be able to like those James Bond movies where you can drive a car by your phone. You'll be able to do that in 5G, or water a plant, from a robotic arm. Wear a haptic glove. and water a plant halfway around the world. That's possible in 5G. Now, you might not drive a car. You might not drive your car halfway around the world. But think of a firefighter or a first responder who's going into a forest fire trying to rescue somebody in a forest. They might control a robot from a distance. Or think of the Russian-Ukraine war was the world's first drone war, right? So being able to control robotic things with your phone is possible. 5G is founded on 3 basic ideas. So I'll get you enough dangerous to be dangerous at a cocktail party about 5G. So it's founded on 3 big ideas, and get ready for a lot of acronyms. The first is called enhanced mobile broadband. So broadband, a lot of high speed, right? Mobile phone, and an enhancement of 4G. So it has 1,000 times the capacity of 4G. So it can hold, 5G is able to have support 1 million devices per square kilometer. That's 1 device per 0.9 square feet. So, really high density of devices. Now today we have maybe 1, maybe 2 devices per person, right? 5G is designed to be able to support 10 devices per person. So the second big idea of 5G is called ultra reliable low latency communications. And I promise I didn't make up these acronyms. But basically it's that sub-millisecond latency, the ultra reliable low latency, the very low latency round trip time communications. And that ultra reliability will feed into Industry 4.0, will robotics, advanced AI native solutions. And the last big idea is called massive machine type communications, MMTC. That's what I said when I meant that 5G is about machine to machine communications, so massive machine type communications. And it's an evolution of something called NB-IoT, narrowband IoT, which is basically, again, the machine-to-machine communications, and it's really fueling that whole Internet of Things. Have you heard of the Internet of Things? Yeah. So basically, when devices talk to each other, sensors talk to each other, smart cities and embedded sensors everywhere, we're able to communicate. And also, there's also special provisions in the 5G standards and 4G standards to allow for devices to have longer battery life, so they're not, like you charge your phone, every day, every other day, right, every third day. And so these devices for IoT are meant to last years, not just a day, right? And so there have to be special things in the standards to let that happen. Now I'm working on 6G now, and 6G doesn't have, in my mind, like the really core ideas that 5G does. Like I can rattle off EMBB, URLLC, MMTC. So 6G is really just sort of, we're still defining it. But it's past the use case definition, what's in 3GPP called SA1 stage. So all of the major ideas are kind of there, but I'm sure they'll spin it in some way so it's more meaningful in a marketing sense. But I can tell you, some of the big things that are coming in 6G. So it's going to be about immersive communications, meaning the AR, VR, virtual reality stuff. It's going to be about massive communications where you have a large reach to a lot of people. It's going to be about what's called ubiquitous communications, which is the constant connectivity. It's also going to be about something called ISAC, Integrated Sensing and Communications, which is about a sort of a smart city, smart networking, smart sensors everywhere. It's going to be AI native, so of course in the past few years we've heard about artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's going to really be a core part of 6G. It's going to be sustainable, so baked into the 6G it's going to be devices that are more green, okay, and sourced by green things. It's going to be cloud native, so the cloud industry is growing at about a 5% clip year on year end, and it's estimated to be about 2.3 trillion by the time it's hit 2030. So there's a lot of things we can say about 6G that we know is going to be in our future, right? And there's going to be standards that are catering to that. So like Industry 4.0, even though that's not one of the key things that's mentioned in 6G, it's woven throughout a lot of the use cases. And Industry 4.0 is a lot about Industry 3.0 was about automation, right? And the algorithms and such. Industry 4.0 will be factories that can reconfigure themselves, the use of AML, private networks, and wireless networks. So I spent a chunk of time here because this is so core to our business. that I think it's important that you're aware of. Okay. Next, we're going to move on to this is called the Vitascope. It's the Vitascope. Vitascope. Yeah, kind of like life, right?
Yeah.
35 millimeter with a 33.5 LP record. So it integrates sound with video. And what's interesting, that the story of early film is actually quite interesting. So early on, there's the Motion Picture Patents Company. They have a stranglehold on filmmaking. Like, nobody else can essentially make films. They collectively, this consortium owns all the rights to make films. But lots of people want to make films because it's in very high demand. So Carl Amell, who eventually you'll be familiar with, he founds Universal eventually. He collaborates with a lot of people and wants to make films. So they start making films like secretly and distribute them secretly, and in the early 1910s or so, he's making films with his partners like Louis B. Mayer and the Zukor, and eventually they invent a lot of things that we take for granted today. But they want to make films, and so eventually they said, let's move to the West Coast, let's move to California, and we'll be far enough away from the East Coast that the Motion Picture Patents Company will have less of a say on what we do. So they move out to this kind of nowhere farm field, and in the middle of nowhere essentially. And today we call that Hollywood. So, but Louis B. Mayer, he finds MGM. Zukor finds Paramount. Sam, Jack, and Harry find the three of the five Warner. Their last name is Warner, right? So they form the Warner Brothers. But Carl Amell, for example, has creates the idea of a star, a movie star, right? So Florence Lawrence in 1910, he promotes her, and before then nobody knew, and like, wow, that's a really cool person. What was her name? Nobody knew what her name was. But he promotes a person as a star, and they get billings and such. And Paramount invents what's called the studio system. And what they do is they make the movies, they distribute the movies, and they also exhibit the movies. That's why you see here the Warner Theater here. So now today we have things like Regal and AMC and Cinemark. And we're starting to kind of move back to this system with what's called the studio system, because Netflix, is showing all these things online, and the people who are making the content are like, hey, wait a minute, we made those movies, we made that content. Why aren't we, making money off of it? So you see with things like Disney Plus, CBS All Access, you're kind of going back full circle back to that model. Okay, so the first big sound and movie that incorporates sound is The Jazz Singer in 1927. It's displayed at the Warner's Theater. And this is actually a gamble, because Sam Warner, he's pushing for this sound film to incorporate sound and not just a silent film, because this is in the era of silent films. And there are lots of big productions in silent film, Wings in 1925 and so forth, that are already in motion. And so his two brothers, Jack and Harry, are like, we don't want to do this. This is a huge gamble. This is a big risk. This is, and the technology at first is actually not so reliable. So it's a gamble on multiple levels. But of course, we know now today, looking in hindsight, that it all pays off, right? Yeah. So many of these things, including starting with this, we take for granted. But at the time that I'm going to talk about these, it's not so obvious. These things are like sound and film is a very unobvious thing, right? So at that time. And many things I'm going to talk about seem very obvious to us in hindsight, but aren't so obvious at the time they were invented. Okay, so this is one of the first televisions. So this is a mechanical television, and in 1925, it transmits 1,000 miles from DC from New York to DC, and Herbert Hoover is shown. And this is right on the cusp of it going to electronics. So in 1927, it'll go to electronic televisions. And then about 10 years-ish or so later, the Federal Communications, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, gets created to regulate a lot of this stuff. So we see here, I'm not going to, again, go over all these, but you can see there's the fax machine, the video telephone, and so forth. So next we're going to come to here. So this is the electrical digital computer. And the computers really come of age during World War II. And during World War II, they have a big problem to solve with the Enigma, trying to crack the Enigma code. Because early on in World War II, the U.S. is absolutely getting pounded by U-boats. There's so many Americans are dying, and a lot of our ships are getting sunk, and we need to crack the Enigma code to save lives in the middle of the war. But also calculating firing tables for when you fire a shell out of like a battleship. That shell is going 2,200 feet per second. It's going 10, 20 miles out, and wind and whatever is affecting the trajectory. So to be able to figure that, to be able to hit something while you're on the roiling sea and even gyroscopes stabilized, it's a mathematical challenge, right? And so early things were done by hand, and the people that did that were called calculators. And so ENIAC, Colossus, all these early computers, all found on Charles Babbage's difference engine, the basics of the idea were laid in place in the 1800s. But it wasn't until really 1942 that we created some of the first computers to crack at Bletchley Park in the UK to crack the Enigma code. This is in 1939 is a binary digital computer by George Stiglitz, and he uses essentially telephone circuit switches to create a computer. And some of you were talking at lunch about the punch card tapes and the VAX BDP11s and the early computing and stuff and basic Fortran and assembly language and such. And the early computers evolved through hardware like the census, taking the census. And that's how the idea of the punch card came. So the development of the computer just didn't happen overnight. It was a series of a lot of inventions coming together, and the impetus of World War II creating a lot of motivation for computing. And some of these other things are also going to touch on that too. So I'm Bell Labs photographer also, and I had the honor of being the photographer for their 100th year anniversary last year. And they had some just amazing displays and stuff. And one of the Eric Schmidt, you might have heard from the CEO of, you might recognize as the CEO of Google, former CEO of Google. He was a Bell Labs intern, and he developed the regular expression in C language. And he said this one panel here, among all the things here, was the most influential thing. So the development of C language, he said, you can't walk 10 feet without bumping into C language. But he also worked on this, so maybe he's a little...
Whatever happened to A and B?
All right, so...
Yeah, why is it called C?
What happened to A and B? That's a good question. I'm not sure what the...
Like AD,
when that is. Okay, so Bell Labs is almost synonymous with Claude Shannon. So this panel here, you might argue, is maybe one of the most important from Bell Labs. It's a really Claude Shannon almost goes hand in hand with Bell Labs, and really important. Even though he doesn't win a Nobel Prize or anything for it, he's just it's a very important aspect in the history of Bell Labs. So, and in 1942, he's working on this project called Sig Sally, and he's basically trying to remember this is World War II, so I need to send a secure communications from one person to one American to another, and I need to make it so it's secure. It's not able to be cracked, right? So, and he has this really remarkable insight. He says, I can send any information I want using a series of yes or no questions, kind of like playing 20 questions. So let's try that with me now. I have in my mind, I'm thinking of an animal, okay? And you can ask me any yes or no question you want, and you try to get to that animal. right? You want to start? Anybody?
Does it have fur?
Does it have fur? No, it doesn't have fur. Good question, though.
Does it swim?
Does it have claws? No.
Does it swim?
Yes, it does swim.
Color?
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
Yes,
Is there no question?
Is it a fish?
It's not yellow.
Is it a fish?
It's not a fish.
Is it a whale?
It's not a whale. It's not a seal.
Dolphin?
It's not a
Is it
dolphin.
a shellfish?
It is not a shellfish. Good question.
Is it a marine mammal?
It is not a mammal. It's marine, yes.
Is
Somebody
it-
asked, is it?
Yeah.
Is it
Sea
larger
snake.
than a cat?
Is it larger than a cat? Yes.
Does it
Can
have a
be.
shell?
I mean, it doesn't always.
Okay.
No.
Sea snake?
That's a really good guess. It's not a sea snake.
An eel?
It's not an eel.
Does it have legs?
Yes, it does have legs.
A turtle?
Octopus?
It's an octopus. Very good. Okay. All right. One of my tour groups got it in 4 questions. And it was
My
like
wife
a
would have gotten
10-year-old that did it. Okay. So Claude Shannon, in 1948, he comes up with this paper called The Mathematical Theory of Communications. And he's actually studying entropy along the communications channel. And one of the things that this theory is famous for is he predicts theoretically how much communications you can send across a particular channel given a certain amount of noise. Now that sounds all very theoretical, and I had to go through the yes/no question. But think about, if I want to send you the word octopus, or Raymond, I want to send you the word octopus. I start with the letter O, let's say. And I can say, you might ask, is the letter O in the first or second half of the alphabet? No, it's not in the first half of the alphabet. Yes, it is in the second half of the alphabet. Is the letter O in the third quarter of the alphabet or the fourth quarter of the alphabet? Yes, it's in the third quarter of the alphabet. No, it's not in the fourth quarter. So you can keep asking yes or no questions until you get down to a single letter, right? And today we call that a bit and a byte, binary. And before Claude Shannon, when you say the word information, you think maybe newspaper. We think gossip, discussion. That's information, right? After Shannon, when you say information today, all of us think bit, byte, binary, right? And that's part of our language today because of this mathematical theory, because of this paper. You can see an example of the paper here on information theory. He creates the sort of the industry. He creates information theory, and the foundation of essentially our modern society, right? So again, he's talking about entropy, and he says this is the maximum amount of communication theoretically that you can communicate across a channel from a sender to a receiver given a certain amount of noise, and that's pretty amazing, right? Like, this is how many words given a certain amount of noise and the bandwidth of the channel that I can send. So that kicks off a lot of the discussion about coding. A lot of people theoretically try to hit that maximum. How do I encode my information such that I can reach that maximum? And it's also the basis of compression formats like the zip format and so forth. So this panel is pretty important to Bell Labs. Okay. So next we're going to move on to radio astronomy. And here is a model of a radio astronomy set, 14.6 meters, so about 50 feet or so in 1933. Carl Yansky, he creates this huge, a person looks like a big, you see a little model of a person there, and about radio astronomy. Now, our eyes detect, the electromagnetic spectrum. It is a huge spectrum, and we only see in the 410 to 700 nanometer wavelengths. So in this huge spectrum, we're teeny. The visible light is only a teeny little sliver of this whole thing of where we can see. But you have very long and very short wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum, whose carrier particle is the photon. So radio waves, light, everything is photons basically, electromagnetic energy, all carried by photons at different frequencies. In other words, oscillating at either very slow oscillations or very fast oscillations. And that's what's called the wavelength. So if you have a very long wavelength, It's very slow oscillations, very fast. It's shorter wavelengths. 5G that I just talked about operates. It has three major bands. FR1 is in the 800 megahertz or so. FR2 is the middle, what's called midband. And FR2 can get up to 39 gigahertz, so millimeter wave communications. So there's about 10 times the amount of radio heads as well. But each radio head can't go as far. It only transmits 100 meters, about 400 feet or so. So next we're going to go to here, which is anytime you see this little, it looks like a penny, a coin here, this was the Nobel Prize. So this is one of the first Nobel Prizes I'm going to talk about. Now, when we look at a light, if you see that light, or if you think about the sun, imagine the sun shining down on us, you know the source of those photons. I mentioned everything in the electron EM spectrum is photons. So, you know that light is shining on you, or the sun, 8 minutes ago, that photon was emitted from the sun and you feel it. Now also you feel, if you put your hand near that light, you would feel some warmth. If you don't put your hand near the sun, but you can feel the warmth of the sun 93 million miles away, 1 AU away. You can still feel the energy of that photon. Now, what was interesting about this project from Bob Wilson and Arnold Penzias, wherever they turned this thing, they saw these photons at a particular energy everywhere. Like the same, basically it was a hiss. Everywhere they turned it, there wasn't a single source of that light that was happening, but rather was kind of everywhere. And the amount of energy was really, 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 really teeny. So it's 2.7, we now know the exact value of 2.73 kelvins. So at 0 kelvins, that's like absolute zero. That's like, absolute zero, nothing is moving, period, right? And this is not much warmer than that, right? And George Gamow, a physicist, he basically, happened to be looking at a similar sort of problem, and so theoretically he found that, or they theorized that basically what they were detecting at 380,000 years after the Big Bang was some of the very earliest photons in the universe. So they were looking at the oldest EM energy at, when the Big Bang had cooled down enough that it was possible to have neutrons and atoms and photons. And as the early universe, the Big Bang, was super, super hot, this, of course, has been cooling down for a long time, and the energy has been dissipating. So this was seen as some evidence for the Big Bang, and that's why they got the Nobel Prize. Okay. Next, we'll move on to optical tweezers. And this table is going to get a little theoretical, so I apologize in advance. But I'll try to make it more, as explainable as possible, as tangible as possible. Okay, so in the Arthur Ashkin, he develops optical tweezers, and he has an interest actually from an early age at something called a Crookes radiometer, which is pretty interesting if you think about it. It's basically something that has 4 vanes, so 4 little sort of panels, and each of these panels are colored black on one side and white on another. And if you just shine light in this panel, this little vane thing will turn. And it's in a vacuum, so there's no air, and the only thing that can go into this thing is light. So it's showing how light has force. So it's a really interesting thing. And it's sort of, that gets some thinking, basically. So he uses a really powerful light, a laser, and he's able to take like sort of a little glass bead, a teeny glass bead, and suspend it by shooting lasers up at it. And it's able to suspend, through the force of that light. And he's studying the reflection and refraction, how the light bends, and how he essentially is able to take a couple of lasers and pinch that little bead. And today, these optical tweezers are able to hold individual atoms and individual molecules. So optical tweezers are used in single-state studies, or in cell manipulation, and colloidal and nanoparticle manipulation, quantum optics, microfluidics, membranes, and all sorts of sort of atomic studies. Very interesting. It opens up the door to a lot of interesting scientific study. So one of the things that it's used for is things like protein folding, right, and protein synthesis and protein degradation and so forth. But the problem of protein folding is really interesting because your DNA codes for whatever 100,000 genes, and those genes are really, your DNA is a sequence of CGAT, right? You might have heard of cyanine, adenine, thymine, guanine. And if you unzip the DNA, every C and G pair together, A and T pair together. And so when the RNA unzips the DNA, the other end of for every C there's a G, for every A there's a T, and so forth. So you basically, that little coding, you can code, your genes code for amino acids. And the amino acids come together to form proteins. And when you put a particular sequence of those CGATs at a particular chunk, it naturally folds up into a shape. And most people have heard of nanotechnology, right? You heard of nanotechnology, right? So now we may be pretty far from nanotechnology. We don't know when we'll make things of that artifice at that scale. But you need look no further than your own body, because your body is a nanomachine. It works at the 1 × 10⁻⁹ meters. And at that nanoscale, the way the body works, the way a lot of what the body does, the mechanics, is it's by touch. So that's why the shape of the proteins is so important, because something will bump into something and something will happen, right? So think of the coronavirus. It looks kind of like that weird funky soccer ball with those little nodule things, right? The shape of the coronavirus is super crucial. It's basically it's one of the key ways of how it works. And understanding the shape of something at that level is really important. And that's why the optical tweezers are so important. Okay, this one is one of the most theoretical ones I'm going to get into, so I apologize in advance. So this is about the quantum Hall effect, but it's pretty interesting. So in electricity, so I've given lots of tours to adults and kids. Explaining electricity is hard. It's not easy, and I'm an electrical engineer by training, and I still find it hard to explain and understand. So, but basically, the electricity is a flow of electrons. You can think of it as a flow of electrons, almost like a river, right? Sometimes I explain to kids like imagine little ping pong balls or little beads, going down a racetrack, right? So, and normally when these little beads or ping pong balls or this flow of electrons, they're kind of haphazard, flowing kind of like a river, right? There's not really a sort of pattern to it. And the voltage equals the current times the resistance. So notice that's a linear relationship. V equals IR. You might have learned in college or high school. It's a linear relationship, right? It's V equals IR. It's just a product of two things. However, if you take a thin piece of semiconducting material like gallium arsenide and you run a big B field, a magnetic field through it, the electric flow is no longer smooth like a river. Rather, there's these little eddies. These little eddies are called Landau levels. So what happens then is the V equals IR is a stepped function, right? It's not a linear relationship anymore. So essentially, what we're seeing though is a quantum effect at a macroscopic level. That's why it's kind of interesting. And also another thing that's interesting about this is right around this time, we know what a conductor is, like copper, where electricity can easily flow. We know where something that's an insulator, like rubber, right, where electricity doesn't flow very well. But in the 40s, we don't know what a semiconductor is so much, and you'll see a lot of things around here that Bell Labs gets Nobel Prizes for revolve around semiconductors, and this is one of them. Okay. So next we're going to talk about the transistor. And the transistor, I'm sure everybody's heard of a transistor. And a transistor, though, is, again, I'm an electrical engineer by training, and it took me a long time to get how transistors work and what they are. A transistor is an amplifier first, and it's a switch second. It replaces these vacuum tubes, these clunky, sort of essentially light bulbs as a switch, doing the same thing, but it's a lot teenier, right? And so essentially, if you remember nothing else, it's a switch and it's an amplifier. That's what a transistor is. So explaining it to, like when I explained it to kids, you imagine like the little balls on a racetrack, right? So if the racetrack is smooth and continuous, the switch is at 1, so the balls are going. If I lift that switch and I break the track, now suddenly the balls can't move and it's a 0. Okay, that's the basic kind of switch aspect of it. And hopefully you'll be able to get most of this explanation. But I'm going to have to go a little bit into chemistry to take the next level of understanding to see why this works. So you learned in chemistry in high school that electrons they're not just like the core and the little thing you draw around it, but actually electrons are in a probability cloud. So the first shell, the s orbital, is just a sphere, it's just a ball, but the electron can be kind of anywhere in that ball. It's a probability distribution, right? The next sphere is called the s-sphere, and it looks kind of like these two lobes, okay? So the SPDF, there's these different, and they have different shapes, but silicon at its outermost point has 4 electrons that are kind of its outermost electrons, and those are called valence electrons. Those 4 electrons are the electrons that it can pair with other things. So that's why silicon can form a lattice, it can form a crystal with 4 other silicon molecules around it, and it forms a really stable structure. We call that sand today. All right. So now you can take out some atoms of that silicon and replace it with something else. So if you put in phosphorus has an extra electron. It has 5 valence electrons instead of 4. And that extra electron is kind of loose and not really connected to anything. It's kind of free. Likewise, you can take boron, take out some of the silicon and put in boron. It only has 3 electrons instead of 4. So it has a hole. Now notice I have an open electron, it's kind of loose, ready to move, and I have a hole ready to accept electrons. So that flow of electrons is what we call electricity. And that's essentially how a transistor works. So the putting in a few phosphorus atoms, that's called doping, you create an N-type doping, or putting in a boron, that's called P-type doping, creates when you put an NPN transistor, you have 2 kinds of doped materials, and the electrons can flow, that's a 1, and eventually these will fill up and the electrons don't move until I apply a voltage up here, it pulls up the electrons and they flow again. So that in kind of a nutshell, I know it's a little hard to understand, but if that was too hard to understand, just remember it's a switch, and it's an amplifier, and it's really teeny. All right.
I think I can never get that far.
All right. So now you're welcome to take pictures here anywhere in the showcase. And I tell people, if there's anything you want to take a picture of, it's this, which is the very first transistor made by Walter Brattain in 1947. It's a point contact transistor, strip of gold foil wrapped over the end of a plastic triangle pressed into the crystal of a semiconductor germanium. The gold strip was sliced by a razor blade at the tip of a triangle to create a 0.05 centimeter gap. And it amplifies the signal 100 times of its input. So everybody have a look, take a picture. This is probably one of the most famous things in the showcase here. So the world's first point contact transistor. Now today, a transistor is, there's millions of them, tens of millions of them in your cell phone. So in the form factor of a modern cell phone, there's tens of millions of transistors, and transistors are 3 nanometers in size today, pushing 2 nanometers with modern lithography. So I'm going to let people take pictures of this.
No Nobel Prize?
All of these are Nobel Prize.
all of
This
these.
is a strip. Every one of these panels is a Nobel Prize. So you can see the physics of imperfect crystals, the radius of perfect Big Bang, and Robert Wilson and Penzias. And they do this in 63, but they get the Nobel Prize in 78. So the charge coupled device, which we're about to talk to, the super resolved fluorescent microscope, and atom trapping, etc. And we're going to talk about Bruce's quantum dots next here. So we always trigger this sound thing. But in 2023, Louis Bruce, he gets the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for the discovery and synthesis of quantum dots, which marks the 10th Nobel Prize award for the work conducted at Bell Labs, and the second Nobel Prize in chemistry. Quantum dots are now used in a wide array of applications, and their higher efficiency and vibrant color, these can be tailored to emit light over a broad spectrum of wavelengths. They power television screens and so forth. So we're going to move over here so I can talk and I'm not competing against this thing there. All right, so gather around. Okay, so quantum dots are a really interesting, also quantum effect, and it's not so obvious why it happens, but it's used in modern television screens and so forth, and basically, in a nutshell, what it is if you have a super teeny this semiconducting material, it basically is so. I talked about the sort of probability cloud of an electron, and if you shrink a material down to a really teeny size, it'll emit when you shine light into it, and it emits a different color, and always at a specific color. So at 3 nanometers, it's always red. At 2.5 nanometers, you get this sort of orange. 2 nanometers, a yellow. 1.5 nanometers, it's always a green. And at 1 nanometer, it's blue. So kind of theoretical, but basically it's a super teeny dot, smaller than your eye can see. And its interesting property is that when you shine just light on it, it always, these little dots emit a certain color. And so that's used in modern televisions. So for example, this Samsung SU HD TV is used at basically before it was a blue LED with a filter to create white light, and with a phosphor filter thing in front of it to create white light. That white light hits RGB things, and that creates all the colors that you see on a LCD TV. So the QLED TV takes that blue LEDs. It doesn't have a phosphor filter on it, but it shines instead just the light onto quantum dots. And those quantum dots emit certain brilliant colors, and those then hit the filters. And so the TV manufacturers use this in modern televisions for very vibrant and brilliant sort of colors. Okay, so next we come here. This is a solar panel. So the solar panel is, again, more semiconducting material. So we discover that basically when light hits a semiconducting material, that it generates electricity. And so naturally, light into electricity, that's a solar panel, right? And so this is one of the world's first solar panels. But also, again, notice all the interesting things happening with semiconductors. If you got that idea, we also take, the next step is to also take a semiconductor with light hitting it. So, and you put a little capacitor under it. It's kind of like a little battery. So again, the solar panel just broadly, takes light hitting the semiconductor and generate electricity. But here, I'm doing something a little different. I'm taking a little semiconductor, putting it's charging, it creates an electric charge. The amount of charge varies by the amount of light that hits this thing. And it turns out that if I take 2 of these capacitors and put them very close together, that they couple, and that I can transfer the electricity on one capacitor to another. So I've created a charge-coupled device, or CCD. And it turns out that if I take a little row of these, like if I just look at sort of a little row of these, I can shift and read how much electric charge is on each of these little sort of cells. So the amount of light that hits this changes the value of how much is in that little cell. And I shift read over, and that's essentially, today we call that a pixel, that's essentially a 4-pixel digital camera, black and white digital camera. Now I can also shift a whole row of these this way, and now this diagram here is showing a 20-pixel black and white camera, basically. So that's the basis of a CCD. And now, then later on, this is called a Bayer filter. So later on, Bruce Bayer at Eastman Kodak, he invents something called a Bayer filter. So I take, remember I said a semiconductor, light shines on it and it creates an electric charge? Well, what if I put a little blue filter before it hits the light? So only the amount of blue light that hits this is, I'm going to register the amount, the value of the blue light that hits that. And then I could do the same with green and red. And now if I call these 4 things a pixel, right, now I have a color, I essentially have a color camera, right? Because now I know the RGB value of that kind of area. It's a little bit bigger than the thing before because I'm using 4 of them. And that's why this color filter array is also called a BGR filter and RGBG filter. It has different names. But essentially the idea is I can take a little color filter in front of those, put 4 of them together, and now essentially I have that. I call that a pixel, and that's a color, essentially a color camera. So at lunch, somebody was talking about functional MRI. So I was at General Electric Medical Systems before I worked at Lucent, and they developed a functional MRI. But the next thing I'm going to talk about is here.
It's on top.
All right. So
On the other.
the next thing I'm going to talk about is lasers. And lasers first start actually with the development of a maser, a microwave application, stimulation of emission of radiation. But the basic idea of a laser is that you have some kind of medium, in this case a ruby crystal, and there are atoms, ruby atoms in this laser. And what happens is the light stimulates it, and the basic idea is that, remember I talked about orbitals before, right? So light, a photon comes in and energizes this electron. It takes it to a higher orbital, right? We talked about orbitals. So the electron is essentially in an excited state. It goes to a higher energy orbital. Now nature says it doesn't want to be in that higher energy state. It wants to be in the ground state. It wants to be relaxed. And what's going to happen is a few milliseconds later, that thing at the higher orbital, that higher energy orbital, is going to relax to its natural previous ground state. And in so doing, it's going to emit a photon exactly at the same frequency as the one that came in. Now if I actually excite one that's already in the excited state, 2 photons of exactly the same frequency will get created. And I can create kind of this cascade of effect of photons, especially if I take a mirror and bounce those same photons back and forth, so they keep stimulating more and more of these ruby atoms. And so that leads us to this, the basic, fundamental, simple laser, right, the helium neon laser. And that's basically the idea of how lasers work. Now today, of course, what's interesting is that there's all kinds of different lasers. There's gas lasers, solid state lasers, vapor lasers, liquid lasers, and of course our friend the semiconductors. There's lots of semiconductor lasers. And what's also interesting is that lasers of all these kinds, again I said the light, the photons are at a very specific frequency. And so each of these lasers have their different uses because they're at different very specific frequencies. So lasers, of course, are used in all sorts of things, from cleansing and welding and cutting and manufacturing, ablation and drilling and engraving and dentistry and medical applications. 3D printing is a big thing now, electronics and drones and all sorts of stuff, automobiles and meteorology. Okay, and here's our friend again, the semiconductor. So like I said, a lot of interesting things done with semiconductors. And again, at the time, these things are not obvious, right? So, but scientists figure, hey, what if we do something with semiconductors? Can we, can they maybe make a laser? So, oh yeah, if we just take gallium aluminum arsenide and we sandwich it between gallium arsenide, of course we have a laser. Anyway, some brilliant scientists take these N-type materials, sandwich it to a P-type material around it, and they put some metal cladding, energize it with a current, and it lasers, lo and behold. So at a particular threshold of current, it lasers, and that's called a heterostructure laser. Again, I promise I didn't make any of these names up. Okay. And if we take it to the next step, we take gallium arsenide, indium gallium arsenide, and do multiple sandwiches. We could create multiple quantum wells. We'll create something called a quantum well laser, which is the basis of the internet, which isn't important or anything. So these particular lasers are now used as the foundation of like photonic circuits and stuff. And what's really amazing is that is a heterostructure laser that I just talked about, and that's a quantum well laser. Those teeny little crystals, and you can look through that little magnifying glass, you can see what they look like. Are pretty incredible. So that's the foundation of step up. So that's the foundation of these photonic integrated circuits that are today these are used in. So the foundation of that is a laser, an optical ring resonator, photodiodes, and optical fiber that you're seeing. That the lasers are fuel they're the backbone of these kinds of circuits. Yeah, so step on up and line up and have a look.
It's like the number of droplets if you sneeze would be that much.
Okay, so next we're going to go over here. All right, so there's a lot of really neat things happening in 6G. One of them is called multi-user massive multiple input, multiple output. And it's based on a military spread spectrum technologies, phased array radar. And the way phased array radar works is basically I'm taking a radar element and I'm sending it with a delayed value so that I perfectly time the delays so that it comes to a particular point all at the same time. So normally, like a normal base station is a 12 stacked aerial, Yagi aerial, and it kind of just is a blob of RF energy, right? But here with MIMO, I'm able to actually kind of steer and focus the energy so that, oh, I know there's a mobile there. I can focus the RF energy at a particular point. So there's a lot of things like that that will fuel that have fueled the advancements of 4G, 5G, and 6G. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is in 1957, there was Sputnik was launched. It was a little basketball-sized thing, and all it did was beep. But it raced around the world at 26,000 miles per hour, and it kicked off the space race. In 1962, Kennedy made his famous landing the man on the moon speech, but years earlier, actually, Bell Labs had already thought about, well, how can were already microwave stations for communications already all throughout the U.S. for TV and so forth, and they said, well, how could we transmit something, say, across the Atlantic? And they sort of had the theory, God, that would be a station that would take a tremendous amount of power, and a station that really tall, big station that was taller than anything of any building that we had. But in 1962, they had the idea of creating a satellite. So here we see Telstar 1. So Telstar is the world's first, long before SpaceX, it's the first joint commercial and government venture. So there's 360 solar panels. There's a transmission belt around this thing. There were two of these made. So this is a replica, an exact replica of the original Telstar. I guess they made another just in case, because why make one when you can make two at twice the price? So it's 2 gig up, 4 gig down. It's a 90-foot tower to receive the signal, and so no matter what axis it can transmit. And You can actually go online. There's YouTube channels. I saw a really interesting one on the development of the Telstar and how it's made. So as an engineer, I can relate that it took years to develop this thing, and it culminates in the launch, right? So there's at Whippany, there's the control. They're talking to Kate Canaveral at NASA, and when it launches, there's 10, 9, 8, and you can see like tension in engineers, like, oh my God, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and it launches, and you see this wave of from the engineers. But it has the first transmissions of the transatlantic transmissions. They show the Eiffel. So it carries the first transmissions across the Atlantic. Now, after Telstar, there have been many other satellites that have carried the Telstar name, but only the first 2 were from Bell Labs. And in the past couple of years, I read 2 really good books. One was called When the Heavens Went on Sale, and the second was called Reentry. They both talk about essentially the privatization of space now. So there's a lot of developments. Everybody's heard of SpaceX, right? But they paved the way to prove essentially that private space launches are possible, and cheap launches are possible. And they have a lot of failures. So a lot of crashed and burning rockets. But now today they're able to actually launch at a fraction of the original NASA costs. These little cubes, these fixed, standardized things of containers into space. They also, in the book, it's interesting. It describes how they launch a mobile phone into space, and the reason why is because the mobile phone manufacturers have done such a good job at miniaturizing. There's so much advancement in a cell phone now that for another startup kind of space company to try to recreate all the stuff in a phone would take a tremendous amount of effort, knowledge, and so forth. And so they go like, I have a zillion apps on this thing. What can I just, does it work in space? Can I just launch it up there and use it? And it turns out it does. So they're able to essentially use cell phones. And so they take these sorts of different ways of thinking and open up a new industry, which I think is really interesting. So I also, like I mentioned, last year was the 100th year anniversary of Bell Labs. So this is just a little sample. There were 26 demos and lots of talks. So I'm just going to read off a couple of these really cool things. So one was a radio on glass. So there was a project where a modern radio is on just glass. So that was really neat. Intelligent devices. So there's lots of research, modern research now in 6G on intelligent devices, AI and software systems. So there's a whole team looking at AI, ML and stuff. Optical sensing. This one was pretty interesting. So I mentioned something called integrated sensing and communications, ISAC. That's going to be a big thing in 6G. And it's basically like where IoT, there's lots of little IoT sensors. Integrated sensing and communications is about smart devices and robots. It's able to sense its environment. So for a robot to do stuff, it has to know, where things are. Right? So I mentioned that I teach a lecture of a course at Drexel University, and one of the things that so I've been doing that for a number of years. So I was talking about smart cars, and then October of 2023, I sat in a smart car, a self-driving car, and so it has to be able to sense its environment, to interact with other people, driving, right? And so 6G is a lot. There's going to be a lot about sensing. So this one project was a fiber optic cable, optical communications. That's one of our big businesses. And that's able to sense vibrations and when road construction is happening, and so they can adjust their communications based on that. So semantic communications, I mentioned 5G haptic communications. So there's a lot of really neat stuff happening in the 6G era. These panels for you to investigate talk about a lot of those. This panel has here all of the things that happened in the 50s and 60s and all the did I reset it? But anyway, so there's a lot of displays there, and there's all of these talk about some of the later newest technology happening, innovations in 6G and stuff. So there's a lot of things about the past. I only went over about 15 or so things. It's about 100 or so things here. So feel free to browse and take a look. Does anybody have any questions?
I'm a little
We're
overwhelmed.
one tour of a lot of stuff, right? Yeah.
So Nokia is moving Bell Labs to where, near New
The
Brunswick?
Helix in New Brunswick, yeah.
What's going to happen to this huge
That's a
site?
good question, yeah. So this site, we're moving to a place about the 10th this size. You can see a little model of it over there. It's a 10-floor building and mostly offices. So the showcase, there will be a showcase, but it'll be smaller. And the archive stuff, I'm not sure exactly all of what's going to happen to it. Basically, the archive kind of was a partnership with AT&T. And when Bell Labs split off from AT&T, essentially that's when we inherited most of the stuff from the archives. And the archives is pretty active. I mean, people doing research and stuff can officially check out stuff from the archive. From the showcase, we have about 10 tour guides, roughly, and we schedule things like I'm doing stuff with kids. Earlier this year, I did we did partnerships with outreach programs for schools, 8th graders.
I was actually more asking about the physical plant. What's going to happen to this site?
Oh,
Any
the
answers to
actual,
that,
I don't know what's
Big
going
for
to,
sale sign up or
yeah, I don't know what's going to actually happen to this physical site. That's
Are people actually researching here?
Oh, yeah. So
And
there's,
they're going to move to the hill?
they're going to move to Helix, yeah. There's a lot, Bell Labs, one of the core locations is in Murray Hill. Again, there's 8 major locations around the world for Bell Labs, and this is one of the big research sites. There was 2 big celebrations for Bell Labs. One was here, and last year was the 100th year anniversary, and the other was in France. So, yeah. All right, so thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Very informative, and feel free to look and read on.